I'll call the meeting to order.
Council Cirillo.
Here.
Council Elliott.
Here.
Council Kennedy. Two present.
Good evening, everyone. I have to say that slightly disappointed because we did make very strong attempts to get in touch with Anel and have someone here. So I greatly apologize for Anel not being here this evening. But we do have Fire Chief Winward and Christine Clancy of the City Engineer's Office. And I know that we did have a few issues to go over. So I know that there's, let's see, Jeepers, the Clay Pit Brook Heights, the groundwater issues, and the testing of the bladder dams, and so let's get started. Would you like to come up and speak?
John Hamblett, 495 Varnum Avenue, co-chair of Pawtucketville Citizens Council. And just as an overview, I know Jim McMarr is going to be speaking specifically, and Deb will also. Our big challenge is that the height of the water on our side of the dam, the Pawtucketville side of the dam, is measured by a gauge down at the Hunts Falls Bridge. Mm-hmm. And that might be good for measuring volume or flow, what they call GPS, gallons per second. But you can't measure the depth of the water behind the Pawtucketville Dam from the Hunts Falls Bridge. So the discussion is, can we have a gauge on the Pawtucketville side of the dam that would allow us to more carefully regulate the height of the water, or ask Anel to more carefully regulate the height of the water. There are, from what I can see, 3 options as far as a gauge goes. The first is to install a new USGS gauge above the dam. USGS has a tracking system, and we can see exactly what the height of the water is by going online.
Right.
That's also fairly expensive. I understand the cost could be shared with state and federal governments, but it's tens of thousands of dollars. A second option that might be worth investigating is, can we move the existing USGS gauge above the dam? It'll still measure the same flow, the same amount of water that's going down to Hunts Falls, but it could more accurately measure depth. And the third option is, don't put in a USGS gauge at all. There's another way of measuring depth, and that's with something that looks like a very, very large yardstick. And you simply submerge it, mark it with the depth in a place where it can be observed. And then we can observe what the depth of the water is and notify Anel if the bladder dam needs to be lowered. So one of the issues is the depth of the water in Pawtucketville and how to measure it. And there may be more options, but those are the 3 that we're aware of.
Thank you so much.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So I did file that motion. I'm wondering if the city engineer has any update. I know I filed the motion to put another gauge above the dam. I know the solicitor did write a letter to Anel, because I think, was it Anel or was it both USGS? I think it was Anel to...
It was Anel. We did have a call. Sorry, we did have a call. The city solicitor and I with Anel and made that request. And I mean, we haven't heard from Anel. since then, or at least I haven't. Chris O'Connor is not here to say there was an update, but I have not heard that Enel has gotten back to us.
What was the date of that call? Was it recent? Was it a while ago?
I want to say it was, I don't have the specific date, but it was about a month ago.
Okay. I'm sorry. Chief?
Good evening, Counselor. I actually have the letter in front of me from the city solicitor to Enel, and it's dated November 16th, 2018. And I don't believe they've answered her yet.
There was a follow-up call to that, and I can get the date of the call to follow up on that letter request, but it was about a month ago. And we did talk briefly about the request for an additional gauge, and they said they'd have to look into it, but there was some initial discussions about, I guess, the third option, the yardstick option, and there was, that would be a different way to measure it, and that might cause some confusion if you have a USGS downstream and then a separate form of measurement. So they did have concerns about that third option, but as far as the other options, whether it be a second USGS or moving a gauge, that's something that I guess is still in their court to respond to.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, actually, Counselor Kennedy and I also put in a motion for a gauge at the Pawtucket Falls. So did that call encompassed all of our motions to try and get that gauge, an additional gauge at the Pawtucket Falls?
Yes, I think it did. I guess without knowing the date of that second motion, I know there was discussion about that request, and again, I can find the date of that call, and we can follow up. I know from that call, the city solicitor was going to follow up again with Enel. I just haven't talked to her today yet, but we can get an update on where that stands.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge that Counselor Kennedy has come into the room. Thank you. Yes.
Madam Chairperson.
Yes.
The gauge, the motion that we had filed was for a gauge that would be in the vicinity of the dam,
Yeah.
above the dam.
Right.
Why does it matter? Are you talking about another gauge that would be downstream from there? Down beyond the falls?
There is an existing gauge at Hunts Falls, and so I think the request is adding a second gauge upstream closer to the Pawtucketville area. And so right now, I guess looking at having a second gauge is a question that still needs to be answered by Enel. And there's a cost to that.
It would seem to me that the important place to have the gauge would be in the vicinity of the dam, above the dam. And that having a gauge down at Hunts Falls, that doesn't do anybody any good, really, because by then the river has dropped, 20 feet or so, right? Don't you think that?
As far as, right now, in terms of on the USGS, it has the gauge at Hunts Falls, and then I know, Chief, you mentioned there's also a gauge upstream. So in terms of how because USGS, how they estimate the elevation of the river, I guess I'd have to look more into that and ask USGS.
Okay. Who would put the gauge in, by the way? Who would install the gauge? The gauge that we requested, who would install that? Would it be the city? Would it be Enel? Who would do that?
Do you got it?
I think it would be the USGS that would install the gauge, correct?
Yeah, in terms of Enel, if it's a USGS, they would have to at least approve of that, and I assume there'd be some effort on their part to have to do that, and then Enel potentially as well. I guess I don't know, but there'd be some effort by USGS.
Do you mean to say that the city and Enel would not be able to put in their own gauge?
Putting in their own gauge would be, I guess, in initial discussions, putting in a separate gauge might add confusion, because right now we use, in terms of the response, we use the USGS, and so the right way to do it is to go through USGS, that's online. Putting in a separate gauge is something that might add confusion, and this is initial conversations with Enel, having two different references being referenced.
I guess I don't really understand why there would be any confusion. To me, you're talking about two completely different elevations that are quite a distance from each other. One is way below the dam, and so whatever that gauge says has doesn't necessarily have a bearing on what goes above the dam.
So right now, we respond, and maybe the chief can speak a little more about it, but we use the USGS, and they predict out, they have an online service where they predict out what the elevation is, and so we rely on that. So if we were to add another gauge that wasn't supported by USGS, then they might, Chief, how would we react differently to that, to having a separate elevation not supported by USGS?
Well, one thing I could say is there's currently a legal binding document between the city and Enel that says
USGS.
that they're going to go by the USGS gauge by the Hunts Falls, and if it's predicted to go over 50 feet, then Enel will lower the dam.
Is there a gauge above the falls somewhere?
There is. There's one by the bridge between Hudson and Nashua, Route 111. There is a gauge up there. Once again, it doesn't really tell you what the levels are of Pawtucketville, but there is a gauge
Right.
above.
No, it is the one at the Hunts Falls, right? Yeah.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Counselor Elliott?
No, I just going to reiterate, I know Councilor Kennedy got here a little bit late, but Mr. Hamlet got up and spoke of three options. One was the USGS above the dam. That's going to cost, this is one of my follow-up questions. I don't know who the lead is on this. I know you're part of it, Madam Engineer, but is it law department? The cost was tens of thousands of dollars. Can somebody narrow that a little bit more?
We can find out. I can talk to, so really, I guess the effort is really myself, the chief, and Chris, the city solicitor have, I guess, been part of those conversations along with the city manager's office. So
well, it would be good to have them there, have them here to answer some questions, so we don't know that. But secondly, the second option, Councilor Kennedy, was that the existing gauge, which I happen to think makes some sense, can be relocated above the dam. I understand there are a series of gauges throughout the state and the country that regulate all the navigable waters because there's this grid system on the release of water, at least in this watershed, all the way up, to the Merrimack River. But I think that makes sense. But the third option was a yardstick or no gauge, right? Okay. Did we propose those three to NL, as best as you can recall?
we talked about we talked about a second USGS. We didn't talk about moving the existing gauge. That's something that, at least I haven't, but I can follow up on. So we can present those three options again in this follow-up with Enel. As far as the yardstick, we did talk through that a little bit more. And instead of a yardstick, one idea, and again, in terms of more of an indicator. And so there's different elevations where the river has, action stage, and that's a certain elevation, and those are color coded. So would that be something, the only thing is you wouldn't be able to read the level. You could just see that, so action is yellow, the next level is orange, where that's flood stage, and then red being more major flood stage. That's something you can paint on the side of a structure, and then you could, whether it be a bridge, and I've seen that in some of the, I think we have one on the Concord River over by the Lawrence Street where it's it's painted on the side of a bridge, just so you can see the color and know what relatively what stage you're in without having a specific. That's something that we talked through, but again, that was proposed, wasn't necessarily proposed, it was talked through. Would that be, I guess, or it seems like the third option would be the yardstick and not that color-coded indicator, correct?
Well, I think we can talk about a lot of options, but, that's the first thing to get USGS to agree to it. And if they do, we've got to get NL to agree to it, because as you just mentioned, Chief, there's specific language that states that they will lower, they will drop the elevation of the dam to a certain amount. So we've got to get NL to agree to that as well. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Hi,
Thank you.
Jim McMorrow, 21 Linden Circle, Pawtucketville Citizens Council. You folks are touching upon a lot of good points with this gauge. I happened to just, on December 7th, contact Deb Forgione of the Pawtucket Citizens Council, because I've noticed recently walking the river. I spend a lot of time down there, and it seems to always be in a flooding position. And I have some picture taken on December 7th. Is that the picture you have?
I've got the
December. Okay.
one with the water was up full level and one was below.
So just by chance, my concern was, it seems that the flashboards are gone, the bladder system's in place and working. When the bladders are up completely, this is the state of the river on December 7th. So regardless, those photos that you're looking at right now are subsequently down a few, I think a week or two on those. But if you'd like to take a look at this,
Same thing.
that's December 7th. And if you look at
I think that,
the actual,
I think that
Oh,
he,
one is before and one is after.
okay, that's the blacksmith shop. And that looks like the river's flooding. All of their docks, everything's underwater. Now, my concern
yeah, that's different.
goes to, there's some erosion that's happening because of the high level of the river, in a perpetual state of high level, when they raise and they lower it and stuff like that. Behind that wall at the blacksmith shop, you can see holes that are starting. So that's the erosion that I'm speaking of. Now, I've only highlighted this one particular area as my concern. Now that I found out that the city has been looking at relocating the gauge, getting a new gauge, whatever, this is going to play right into it, I think, and give you a better idea, okay? So my concern was the flooding. Now, we come down to December 21st, Chief Winwood sent out an email. Because of the heavy rain today, the Merrimack River water level is predicted to rise to 50.2 feet on Lowell, in Lowell on Sunday, December 23rd at 8 a.m. Enel has lowered all 5 zones on the Pawtucket Dam, which they did do. Like I said before, I walk the river all the time. I have pictures of before and after, and what is surprising, when I look at the zone, what they have, the river gauge, you'll notice that when they lower the bladder, here it is, with the bladder's up, they lower the bladder, and all of a sudden, downstream, the river jumps up to 42 feet, 47 feet, jumps up to 47 feet. So we went, in the matter of like 5 hours, that gauge, in 5 hours, went from 45 feet to 47 and almost 47 and a half feet. The gauge doesn't lie. So when the water's high upstream, the gauge reads low downstream, and vice versa. And like I say, there's the gauge. I also have pictures. Again, those are some of the pictures that are circulating now of the high water, okay? This is at 11:46 a.m. on 12/20. 12/21 at 7:38. It's getting back down to where it normally flows at. I mean, this is at the blacksmith shop. They've built this landing so, for their work boats and stuff like that. The tour boats come in and out. But normally, since the flashboards are gone and the bladder's installed, it's underwater. And you can clearly see the erosion that I'm starting to talk about behind. So my concern is erosion, and now I'm on board with getting that gauge relocated. It might be the cheaper way. We still got to pay for whatever, the relocation, or Enel can help us out or something like that. John Hamblett spoke of having a manual gauge. There is, right there at the entrance to the Northern Canal. And I took pictures of the water height at 12:09. It's at 4.5 feet. Okay, so if you look at 4.5 feet, the river's up over its banks. Something's not right here. 12:08, river's going down. Okay, so that's on in December. Now I've gone down on a daily basis charting it, taking pictures. So, I mean, I'd be more than happy to share this with any and all of you. And whatever I can do to help, on this. I just truly believe that the gauge needs to be relocated. It does not give an accurate picture of what is really happening on the river as it goes through Lowell. Because of the dam, the water is up high, the gauge is low. You lower the river upstream, the gauge goes high. It doesn't make sense. So I think we need to make some adjustments on this. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Counselor Rita Marcier?
Hi, good evening, Deb Forgione, Pawtucketville Citizen Council. Okay, so I believe that I'm glad we have moved the conversation about the gauges. Everyone in this room has given a lot of time, effort, meetings to make a lot of things happen. Ed Kennedy, you got us the backwater study, which kind of supports why we need the gauge. I think we even have that report that would show exactly why we need the gauge. So having the conversation about it is backed up by a $35,000 report. It's where do we go from here, and who are the people that actually can make that happen? And I think that sometimes, when we're just starting to go forward, not that we're at the seat of our pants, but at this point, we should know who would be the person. And the fact that we don't kind of surprises me, and I think it surprises everybody here. We don't know. And I think that that's job number one. We have to know exactly how do we get the gauge, how does that process work. So my question would be, who would head that up? Like what department, who would really be the captain of that ship? So that's the first one. We need to know that. The other thing the fact that Rodney made the motion about the gauge, Ed Kennedy, you made it, because you have both been, for the last 7-8 years, watching what's been going on and seeing the importance of it. The other thing where we've made progress is the chief. The chief is the chief and commander of Pawtucketville right now. We have never had anybody organize us like he has with Anel, being able to monitor those boards, and we can see that really had been needed, and the fact we have it now, we can see how we had been underserved because we never had that. Which leads me to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'm going far ahead because I know everybody's on board about the gauge, everybody's on board of why we need the gauge, but I'm worried about what goes on from here on in, about the fact that we can participate when Anel wants to relicense. And I'm very afraid we're going to miss the opportunity if we don't right now have a plan on who's going to be the captain of that, and make sure that we stay on course, that we have a plan, that we have documents, that we have a place at the table. And I think what I'm the most worried about is under the last 3 managers, each one had a different style, each one had a different philosophy about Pawtucketville and what went on in our neighborhood, and we might not ever have the same manager every year, every 2 years, every 3 years. So my concern is who actually will be taking this by the horns and running with it, no matter who's the city manager at the time. And I'll just mention this to you, is, okay, so we all met, let's see here, it was in the summer, and we were at the, the conference center, and Karen was there, and the dialogue started, and I just don't know where that went. That was July 17th, 2018, and at that point, there was a comment period, FERC was there, and we were all there because of the fact that we were going to be moving forward, letting people know that their license is going to be coming up, and I'm just wondering where we are with that. Do we have somebody that is going to spearhead, manage this process to make sure that we're at the table with Enel when they come up for the license, because everything we're talking about needs to be in that license and finally have a place at the table. We have an equal voice. I mean, we got our butts kicked by Enel because of their attorneys when it came to the bladder dam and the whole process, but we all learned a lot. And all that, what we learned, cannot go to waste. But we do need a captain of the ship or someone who will spare us for the relicensing. So, thank you.
Thank you, Deb.
Thank you,
Councilor.
Madam Chairman. I was on the flood subcommittee many years ago with Councilor Elliott, and at that time, we went through all kind of to and fro, back and forth. And at that time, we learned that when you're dealing with Enel, I think it's easier to pull the teeth out of a awake pit bull than it is to try to get Enel to the table, because that's just the type of an organization that they are. To say that that gauge cost hundreds of thousands of dollars is probably peanuts to Enel. And to say that it's expensive, I don't care. They can afford it. The point is, will they honor our wishes? It was not easy all these years dealing with them, no doubt about that. I put them in the same category as Pan Am to the railroad. They're just that type of people where they got the best lawyers, the best money, and they don't need to worry about minions like us. That's the impression I get. Not that I believe that we're minions, but that's how they feel about us. So it was unbelievable. So what I say is, I think that they could do it. I think that Deb is right. The only leverage we would have is during license time, when we ask them if they could, we'll support your license renewal if you could support us, and this is what we'd like. I don't think what the people in Pawtucketville are asking for is out of sight. I think it's really a good thing. They're not asking for the moon. They're asking for a gauge, and I don't see the problem. I mean, if it's that expensive for them, why can't they swap it from downriver by Hunts Fall and just move it up there? And I don't think that a permanent gauge being like a rod or a stick going in the ground is that mind-boggling. But having said that, we're dealing with a company that they don't really care. But I will say that this is a company that I believe is based out of Italy. Are they from Italy? So they're from Italy. It's not like they're next door. So I'm wondering, do they have any connections in the immediate area that would do their bidding or whatever for them? Does someone from Enel contact the chief to say that it has reached a certain height and we're lowering it? Is this happening?
Yes, there is a manager that I deal with regarding the 50-foot level and when they're going to lower the dam, and he's located in the Lawrence, Haverhill area.
Well, does he have any pull or anything with Enel to try to be a mediator to try to get a gauge?
The answer I generally get is I'll move it up the chain to my superiors.
Well, you know what? Moving it up the chain is another way of saying, yeah, we'll put it under the blotter for oblivious time when we're not going to do anything about it. And to call them, I don't know where we're going with that, but the only way to get them is when it's time for renewing the license, to just step forward and say, we don't have a problem with renewing your license, we like to be a good partner, but this is what we'd like out of the deal. And so this is the only thing I can think of. Thank you.
Yeah, I was okay. Councilor Elliott?
I know we have some other issues that to deal with, but I think to move forward on this, I'll make a motion that we request Congresswoman Tsongas send a letter to USGS asking them.
Who? Tsongas?
I mean, Congresswoman Trahan. Thank you. And I wrote it down too. Congresswoman Trahan send a letter to USGS, maybe the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission as well, relative to the relocating. I personally think we should relocate the gauge from one end to the other? Because then you're going to have confusing data sets when it comes to, I think, the overall management and spectrum of the river. So I think that's the first thing. And secondly, as part of that motion, request the manager designate a, I'll say, project manager or contact person for this entire effort.
Second the motion.
I'll second the motion. Well,
On the motion? Can I speak on the motion?
yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the gauge has to be near the dam, above the dam. I think the gauge has to have numbers on it. If the gauge is going to have colors on it as well, that's a good thing. There's no reason why the gauge can't have both things. And so that would be good. I don't think, it sounds to me like what you're saying is the only reason we depend on the gauge down at the Hunts Falls is because the agreement that the city has with Enel cites that gauge. But the gauge doesn't belong down there. It just happens to be there. And so, maybe the law department has to meet with Enel and make an amendment to the agreement so that we're using a different gauge. I don't, for the life of me, understand why the gauge needs to be so expensive. And I also think that there are other entities that can put the gauge in. I think that the city would. There's nothing that prohibits the city from installing a gauge. There's nothing that would prohibit Enel from installing a gauge either. And I don't think it needs to be all that much money to do that. But that's what the motion's all about. It has, the idea that we have a gauge down at the Hunts Falls Bridge does nothing for the intent of the motion, and really does nothing, I think, for the people that live in Pawtuckettville that watch that river every day. So I'm happy to support the motion. I do think that there should be a point person. There is a person that lives in the area who represents Enel in dealing with the communities, and I think that the Congresswoman is well aware of that person. So maybe between all of them, they can come up with some sort of agreement or get Enel to at least listen to the requests coming from the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Winward?
And I might suggest, if the gauge does get moved, there's a concrete wall where Clay Pit Brook empties into the river, and maybe that'll be a good location for a gauge if it does get moved.
Yes.
If I could just add, I think that's a good idea as well. A solution to this whole thing would be if that culvert where Clay Brook empties into the river was below the dam instead of above the dam, then we wouldn't be having this meeting or this wouldn't be an issue.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have also an issue with the Clay Pit Brook Heights, and I think that this would clear that up also, correct?
Should we vote on the motion?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, let's do a vote on the motion.
Council Cirillo.
Yes.
Council Elliott.
Yes.
Council Kennedy.
Yes.
3 yeas.
Thank you. Let's see, and there was an issue with regards to the partial boards down when they should be full down at certain times. No, nothing on that? I just want to make sure that when the boards should be full down, they're only partially down. Has there been an issue with that?
I think that's a good question for the chief. I think what was observed was that the boards are supposed to come down.
Right.
And they really weren't coming all the way down, but then again, yeah.
Someone had brought up that issue, and I wanted to bring it up, just to...
From what I've observed, when the prediction is to go over 50 feet, the boards were down all the way. There were other times when it was close to 50 feet when the boards were partially down. And I do believe that there's more work to do. They're not quite finished with their computer. I believe there's a computer program that's supposed to control the boards.
Okay.
I'm not sure of the details as to when they're partially down and when they're fully down. Someone from Enel would have to answer that question. But I have noticed that when the prediction is above 50 feet, they have been down 100%. Other times when it's been 48 feet, 49 feet, they've only been partially down. And I believe right now they're all frozen in the opposition, so they wouldn't be able to go down at the moment.
Okay.
That's
all
why I hung around, because that was something interesting that I just saw, because when we were coming over here, how high the river is, and when you look at it, they're up fully, and we were like, well, are they doing that on purpose, or are they frozen? Because when we had the flash boards, it was operation of naturally, like the boards would bend, the poles would bend, and now that they operate it, are they frozen? Can they be moved?
They appear to be frozen to me. Someone from an L would have to answer that question.
There's things that we're not, like, as we're going along, things that we don't have the answer to. When we think about it, we really should know what happens. Are they frozen? And if it's 50 feet, will those boards go down? So we don't know. But that's why it would be great to have, like, people that really, really work on this, like it's part of their job to know who to talk to. I do have some information here, like moving the gauge sounds terrific. That doesn't cost anybody any money. But I think everyone got an email from Joe Smith, and he said that the stream gauge suitable for inclusion in the U.S. Geological Survey System costs between $20,000 and $35,000 to install, depending on the site. But then it's $16,000 a year to operate, and I wasn't quite sure what that meant. Why did it cost that much money to operate? So things that we don't know. More things. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I think that's pretty much,
Can I?
yes, yep,
Can I offer a second motion then?
yes.
Request that the city manager get in touch with Nell and find out about whether or not the bladder dam freezes and
Yeah.
What's the solution to that when it does?
Yeah.
Second.
Counselor Elliott, second. And let's do a vote on that?
Okay. If there's no objection, can I add to the motion to also ask the city manager to investigate on the matter that Mr. Smith brought up and find out whether or not there is a cheaper way to do it than what's been presented?
Yes. Second the change. So we'll do a vote on the motion, please?
Counselor Cirillo.
Yes.
Counselor Elliott.
Yes.
Counselor Kennedy.
Yes.
3 yeas.
Thank you. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to speak with regards to? Okay. Oh, absolutely, yes.
You want these?
No, he said we could keep those.
So the meeting can be adjourned.
I think
think
we're
those
good.
are helpful.
It was helpful this evening, but I don't know that we'll...
Thank you so much. Thank you for all of your information. So I'm going to
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
second. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming out this evening. I greatly appreciate your time and all of your information. So thank you. We just adjourn. Okay. Thank you, everyone.